My father had spent decades behind the wheel, a seasoned truck driver whose life was measured in miles and hours, his world confined to the endless stretch of tarmac between Edinburgh and London. The road had become his second home, its rhythm ingrained in his very being, the steady drone of the engine beneath him, the hypnotic repetition of white lines flashing past, the dull glow of streetlights at rest stops that blurred together in his memory. It was a life of solitude, broken only by the occasional stop for fuel, a rushed meal eaten under the artificial glow of a service station, or a brief exchange of words with another weary driver before climbing back into the cab and disappearing into the night. The routine had settled into his bones, predictable and monotonous, a never-ending loop of highway and horizon. He had driven through all seasons, in all conditions, battling torrential rain that turned the roads into slick death traps, navigating through dense fog that swallowed everything in sight, pressing on through snowfall so thick it made the entire world look like a blank slate. He had seen the motorway at its most peaceful and its most dangerous, had witnessed the quiet beauty of dawn breaking over the hills and the eerie loneliness of the road at 3 a.m, when the world felt utterly deserted. Strange things happened out there, in the in-between hours when most of the world was asleep. He had passed cars abandoned with their hazard lights still blinking, their drivers nowhere to be seen. He had watched mist creep over the asphalt like something alive, thick tendrils swallowing up the road ahead. Once, he had even encountered a stag standing motionless in the center of the M6, its massive antlers silhouetted against the glow of his headlights, staring at him like some ancient guardian of the highway, unmoving, unafraid. He had seen it all. Or so he thought. But nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the night he saw her. It began as just another routine drive, one of countless journeys along the same well-worn stretch of motorway. The sky loomed overhead, an oppressive expanse of dull slate, thick with the promise of rain that had yet to fall. The air felt heavy, charged with that peculiar stillness that comes before a storm, as if the atmosphere itself was bracing for impact. The road ahead stretched out endlessly, a river of asphalt disappearing into the horizon, its surface gleaming under the faint glow of distant headlights. Traffic was sparse, the motorway almost eerily quiet, with only the occasional car or lorry passing in the opposite direction, their headlights flashing like fleeting ghosts in the night. The rhythmic pattern of white and red lights from distant vehicles pulsed against the darkened landscape, rising and falling like a heartbeat in the silence. The hum of the truck's engine filled the cabin, steady and reliable, blending with the faint patter of wind against the windshield. He was making good time, the familiar weight of the wheel in his hands, the gentle sway of the truck as it hugged the curves of the road. Everything was as it should be, predictable, uneventful, just another stretch of highway cutting through the night. And then, just at the edge of his vision, something shifted. A movement in the next lane, subtle at first, barely enough to pull his attention from the road ahead. But there was something about it, something that unsettled him, that sent an instinctive prickle of unease down his spine before his brain could even process why. He glanced to his right. And that was when he saw her. A car, sleek and dark, its polished surface absorbing the dim glow of the streetlights, moving in perfect synchrony with his truck, matching his speed with an almost unnatural precision. There was nothing outwardly unusual about it at first, just another vehicle on the motorway, one of countless others that came and went along these stretches of endless road. Its tinted windows reflected the faint shimmer of passing headlights, its body gliding smoothly over the asphalt like a shadow in motion. But then, without thinking, without even meaning to, he glanced over. And that was when he saw her. A woman, seated stiffly in the passenger seat, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap as if she were bracing for something. Her hair was yanked back into a bun so severe it seemed to pull at her scalp, each strand wound with ruthless precision, not a single lock out of place. It wasn't just neat, it was forced, pulled back so tightly it looked painful, like something done in a hurry, with no concern for comfort, just control. But it wasn't the hair that made his stomach tighten, nor was it the unnatural stillness of her body. It was her face. She was looking at him. Directly at him. Not a casual glance, not a passing look of curiosity, but something else. Something deeper. Her eyes were wide, too wide, the white stark against the dim interior of the car, unblinking, locked onto his with an intensity that made his grip tighten on the wheel. Her lips were slightly parted, as if caught mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-scream that never quite made it past her throat. She was afraid. Not startled, not uncomfortable, terrified. And she was staring straight at him. Wide, unblinking eyes, filled with something between terror and desperation. Lips parted, as though caught mid-silent scream. A face frozen in horror, staring directly at him. For the briefest moment, his mind struggled to process what his eyes were telling him. A single second stretched into something longer, something that felt almost suspended in time, as if the weight of that stare had frozen him in place. His grip on the wheel tightened instinctively, muscles tensing, his pulse hammering against his ribs in a deep, unsettling rhythm. He knew fear when he saw it. He had seen it in the aftermath of motorway collisions, in the faces of stranded drivers on the side of the road, in his own reflection when he had narrowly avoided disaster in bad weather. But this was different. This wasn't the fear of an accident or bad luck. This was something else. Something worse. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The car jerked suddenly to the right, its tires cutting sharply across the lane without hesitation, moving with the kind of urgency that came from desperation rather than carelessness. It didn't slow. It didn't hesitate. It simply peeled away, veering toward the next exit with an almost unnatural precision, disappearing into the darkness beyond the motorway without a single flicker of hesitation. One moment it was there, a silent companion in the night, and the next it was swallowed whole by the shadows, vanishing from sight as if it had never existed at all. The silence that followed was deafening. His fingers tightened around the wheel, knuckles whitening as he forced himself to focus on the road ahead. The logical part of his mind, the part that had spent years filtering out the oddities and unpredictabilities of long-haul driving, tried to reason with him. It was nothing. A trick of the light. An illusion shaped by exhaustion and the monotony of the road. Maybe even just a misunderstanding, a glance misread, an expression that meant something entirely different than what his instincts told him. But his gut didn't buy it. Something about that moment lingered, gnawed at the edges of his thoughts like a dull, relentless blade. That look in her eyes, wide, desperate, pleading, it wasn't the kind of thing you could misinterpret. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't discomfort. It was fear. The kind of fear that locked your muscles in place, that made every breath feel too shallow, that left an imprint even after it was gone. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if to physically rid himself of the image. There was nothing he could do now. The car was gone, vanished into the night like a shadow slipping through his fingers. He had a schedule to keep, deliveries waiting at the other end of the journey, a tight window that didn't allow time for distractions, especially distractions that didn't make sense. So he pushed on. The minutes bled into each other, the road stretching out in an unbroken, endless ribbon of black asphalt, leading him steadily closer to London. 30 minutes passed in near silence, save for the steady hum of the engine and the rhythmic drumming of rain as it began to fall, light at first, then heavier, spitting against the windshield in quick, angry bursts. The wipers scraped across the glass, sweeping away droplets that only seemed to multiply with each second. The sky had darkened further, heavy with the weight of the approaching storm, clouds rolling over the landscape like thick, suffocating smoke. He told himself he was imagining things. That exhaustion had twisted something normal into something sinister. That fatigue had played its usual tricks on the mind, weaving paranoia into an otherwise uneventful night. And he almost believed it. Almost. Until it happened again. At first, it was just a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a brief disruption in the monotonous flow of traffic, nothing more than another car slipping into his lane, keeping pace with him through the rain-slicked motorway. He might not have even noticed it, just another vehicle, another set of headlights, another anonymous traveler in the night. But something pulled at him, an instinct buried deep in his bones, a warning that whispered before his mind had even caught up. He turned his head. And there she was. A different car this time. Not the sleek, dark one from before. This one was an older model, a dull shade of blue, its headlights casting a dim, almost sickly glow onto the wet road. A different driver, too. This one was a man, his face impassive, his hands gripping the wheel in the steady, controlled manner of someone entirely focused on the drive. No hesitation. No emotion. Just driving. But the woman in the passenger seat, she was the same. The same twisted, excruciatingly tight bun pulling her hair back like a vice, as if whoever had done it hadn't cared about pain, only control. The same rigid posture, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that even in the dim light, he could see the tension in her fingers. But worst of all, the same expression. Wide eyes, too wide, so full of something raw and terrified that it sent a sharp, involuntary chill through his body. Her lips parted, frozen mid-breath, her mouth shaped around a scream that never came. No sound. No movement. Just that look. A silent plea, locked onto him with an intensity that burned into his brain, demanding that he understand. His breath stilled in his chest. This wasn't possible. His blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. His mind reeled against the sheer improbability of it, scrambling for any rational explanation, but none came. The first car had taken an exit long ago, swallowed by the night, vanishing into the unknown with no chance of looping back onto the motorway so quickly. And yet, here she was again, the same woman, sitting stiffly in the passenger seat of a completely different vehicle, driven by a completely different person. It defied logic. It defied everything. A cold, creeping sensation curled around his spine, his pulse thundering beneath his skin, a heavy, erratic beat that made his chest feel tight. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. This wasn't just a coincidence, wasn't just a trick of fatigue or paranoia creeping in from too many hours on the road. This was real. And it was deliberate. His fingers clenched around the wheel, his knuckles rigid, his breathing shallow as he forced himself to act, to do something, but before he could react, before he could reach for his phone, before he could even make the conscious decision to slow down and get a better look, the car shot forward. No hesitation. No brake lights. Just sudden, sharp acceleration. It peeled away from him with an almost aggressive speed, slicing through the wet road like a blade, its taillights fading into the distance, swallowed by the dark curtain of rain and night. Within seconds, it was gone, disappearing into the endless black stretch ahead, just like the first. And this time, the silence that followed felt suffocating. He swore under his breath, the words barely more than a harsh whisper against the tense silence inside the cab. A pit had formed in his stomach, heavy and unmoving, an instinctual weight of dread that no amount of reasoning could shake. There was no way, this was some bizarre coincidence. Two completely different vehicles, two different drivers, yet the same woman, sitting in that passenger seat like some kind of recurring apparition. His mind ran through the possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Human trafficking? A hostage situation? Some kind of forced transport, moving her from one place to another, switching cars to avoid detection? He didn't want to know, but every instinct in his body, the instincts honed from years of experience on the road, from a life spent reading situations before they turned dangerous, was screaming at him that something was wrong. He had to do something. Even if he had no concrete details, even if he hadn't been able to catch a license plate, even if all he had was his gut telling him that this wasn't right, he couldn't just keep driving as if nothing had happened. His hands tightened on the wheel, his foot easing off the accelerator as he made his decision. He'd pull into the next service station. Call the police. At the very least, report what he'd seen, let them decide if it meant anything. But before he could react, before he could even shift lanes, the car was gone. Vanished. As if it had never been there at all. And what could he even say? Call the police and tell them he had seen the same woman, with the same terrified expression, in two different cars, with two different drivers, hours apart? That wasn't exactly a neatly packaged emergency, wasn't something that fit cleanly into the kind of report that dispatchers took seriously. He had no names, no license plates, no concrete proof, just a sick, gnawing feeling in his gut that something was terribly, terribly wrong. He exhaled sharply, jaw clenched as his fingers drummed against the wheel, frustration and unease coiling together in his chest. The road stretched out ahead of him in an unbroken stream of headlights and shadows, endless and indifferent. The police would ask for details. He had none. They would ask if he had seen a crime. He hadn't, not exactly. They would ask what, exactly, he was reporting. And he wouldn't have an answer. He kept driving, forcing his hands to stay steady on the wheel, but the tension had rooted itself deep within him, sinking into his muscles like a slow-working toxin. His nerves were raw, stretched tight, his pulse an uneven rhythm in his ears. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked to the mirrors, scanning the lanes behind him, searching for any sign of that car, that woman, half hoping, half dreading that she would appear again. But the motorway remained empty, indifferent, stretching on through the night like it always had. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there. For long, dragging hours passed, each minute stretching out with an unbearable weight, pressing down on him like the miles of asphalt still left to cover. The road had changed in those hours, the traffic thinning as the night deepened, leaving only the occasional lorry lumbering through the darkness, its headlights carving out faint, flickering tunnels of visibility against the black void ahead. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier, laced with the quiet hum of something unspoken, something lurking just beneath the surface of awareness. He was exhausted. Not just from the drive, but from the oppressive weight of everything he had seen, everything he couldn't explain. His body ached, his limbs stiff from the hours spent gripping the wheel with unnecessary force, his shoulders tight with the tension that had settled there like a permanent fixture. But worse than the physical fatigue was the thought, the nagging, inescapable replay of those eyes, that face, that silent, frozen scream. He couldn't shake it. Couldn't forget it. And yet, he pushed on. The city lights of London weren't far now, the first distant glows appearing like scattered embers on the horizon, breaking up the suffocating blackness of the motorway. He told himself it was almost over, that soon, he would be pulling into his final stop, unloading his cargo, stepping out of this cab and into the crisp air of the early morning, away from whatever twisted, inexplicable thing had unfolded on the road that night. Then, again. Another car. Not the first. Not the second. A completely different make, a different model, its body dull under the scattered glow of the motorway lights, its windows streaked with the mist of the night air. The driver was new, too, a man, older this time, his hands gripping the wheel with an unsettling calm, his face cast in shadow, impassive, almost indifferent, as if nothing unusual was happening in the seat beside him. But the woman. She was the same. Same tight, excruciatingly pulled back bun, the strands of hair so taut they seemed to be pulling at her scalp, as if each one had been yanked and twisted into place with violent precision. Same wide, terror-filled eyes, but this time they were wilder, more desperate, filled with something raw and unchecked, something that hadn't been there before. This wasn't just fear, this was pure panic, unrestrained and uncontrollable, spilling out of her like a dam breaking under pressure. And this time, she wasn't just staring. She was screaming. Mouth open in a distorted, soundless wail, her entire face contorted with a desperation so visceral it made his stomach twist. Her hands, white-knuckled, trembling, were pressed hard against the window, fingers splayed wide, nails dragging against the glass as if she were trying to claw her way out, trying to shatter the barrier between them, trying to reach him. Begging. Pleading. Silently screaming for him to do something. His stomach lurched violently, a deep, instinctive reaction that coiled in his gut like a fist tightening around his insides. His breath caught in his throat, lodged there, as if his body refused to process what his eyes were forcing him to see. A cold sweat prickled along the back of his neck, spreading down his spine, an unnatural chill creeping through his limbs despite the warmth of the cab. And then he heard her. It didn't make sense. The windows were up. The relentless roar of the engine, the rhythmic thrum of tires against wet asphalt, the rush of wind whipping past the heavy frame of his truck, none of it should have allowed any sound to reach him. And yet, somehow, he could hear it, feel it, a raw and desperate energy that seemed to seep through the glass, through the steel, through the very air between them. Not words, just terror. It wasn't a scream in the way a person would cry out in pain or surprise. It was something deeper, something primal, something so unfiltered and consuming that it clawed at his nerves like a sickness, like a disease that had no cure. Not words, just terror. It wasn't a scream in the way a person would cry out in pain or surprise. It was something deeper, something primal, something so unfiltered and consuming that it clawed at his nerves like a sickness, like a disease that had no cure. The sheer force of it radiated from her like heat from a fire, an invisible, suffocating wave of desperation, the kind of fear that didn't just exist, it infected. The car that carried her, trapped her, sped ahead with a sudden, almost unnatural urgency, its tires slicing through the wet road, its taillights glowing red against the black void of the motorway. He fought to keep it in his line of sight, his foot hesitating over the accelerator, torn between the instinct to follow and the gnawing dread that told him not to. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it was slipping away, weaving between lanes with a practiced precision, moving as if it knew it needed to vanish before he could get too close, before he could read a license plate, before he could do anything. His pulse hammered in his throat as he strained to keep track of it, but then, just as his mind registered what was happening, it was gone. Not in an obvious way, not in a reckless burst of speed, but in a way that was somehow worse. 1 second it was there, taillights blinking in the distance. The next, it had melted into the traffic, swallowed by the night, disappearing so seamlessly that for half a second, he questioned whether it had ever been there at all. Enough! A surge of adrenaline exploded through his veins, overriding every other instinct, silencing the nagging voices in his head that told him to keep driving, to pretend he hadn't seen, to let it go. He couldn't. Wouldn't. His foot came down hard on the brake, the sudden deceleration jerking him forward against his seatbelt as the truck groaned in protest, tires skidding slightly on the damp road before gripping the asphalt again. He veered toward the nearest levee, his hands clenching the wheel so tightly his knuckles burned. The moment the truck lurched to a stop, he was moving. His hands, trembling, slick with cold sweat, fumbled for his phone, his fingers slipping over the smooth surface as he struggled to steady his grip. His breath was coming fast, shallow, like he had been running, like his lungs couldn't catch up with the frantic drum of his heartbeat. This wasn't just exhaustion playing tricks on him. This wasn't paranoia creeping in after too many hours alone on the road. This was real. He stabbed at the screen, barely registering the motion, barely aware of anything but the white-hot panic pressing against his ribs. The dial tone droned in his ear, each second stretching unbearably long, a cold pit forming in his stomach at the thought that maybe, just maybe, no one would pick up. Then, a voice. The police dispatcher. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat, tripping over themselves in his breathless urgency. His pulse hammered against his skull, his own voice coming out uneven, shaking. But he forced it out. Because this, whatever this was, wasn't something he could ignore anymore. They listened. The dispatcher's voice remained level, calm, the practiced neutrality of someone trained to handle emergencies without emotion. But there was something in the way they responded, something just beneath the surface, something off that made his skin crawl. A slight hesitation, a shift in tone so subtle most people wouldn't have caught it. But he did. And then they said something that made his entire body go cold. They had already received multiple calls. Not one. Not two. Three. 3 separate reports, from 3 different people, all describing the same thing. The same woman. The same terrified expression, frozen in silent desperation. The same switching cars, different drivers, the same impossible reappearance along the motorway. And that was the moment, not when he first saw her, not when she appeared a second time, not even when she was clawing at the window screaming, that was the moment when true dread settled into his bones. Because it meant that whatever this was, whatever nightmare was playing out on the road that night, he wasn't the only one seeing it. It was real. And it was happening. That should have been reassuring. It should have made him feel less alone in what he had witnessed, should have given him some semblance of validation that he hadn't imagined it, that this wasn't just some sleep-deprived hallucination conjured by too many hours on the road. But it didn't. Because if other people had seen her too, had seen exactly what he had seen, had felt that same gut-wrenching, skin-prickling wrongness, then that meant it wasn't just some freak coincidence. It wasn't some harmless misunderstanding. It was something else. Something worse. Something deliberate. That realization settled over him like a lead weight, pressing into his chest, making each breath feel heavier than the last. His eyes flicked back toward the road, scanning the darkness as if expecting to see her again, as if the nightmare wasn't finished with him yet. His pulse pounded against his skull, his fingers still clenched around his phone, now slick with sweat. He waited, gripping the phone so tightly his fingers ached, his breath shallow and uneven as he strained to catch the faintest sound, the slightest indication that someone on the other end of the line was working on this, that they were sending officers, that they had eyes on the road, that they had any clue what the hell was happening. His mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was she being moved from car to car to avoid detection? Was she being taken somewhere, or worse, had she already reached her final destination? The seconds crawled by, stretching into unbearable, suffocating stillness. He expected the dispatcher to return with new information, expected the line to crackle with movement, with orders being given, with the sound of urgency. He expected something. But no updates came. No confirmation that she had been found, no word that another officer had spotted her, no reassurance that his call had led to any real action. No acknowledgement that any of this made sense. No explanation that could smooth over the raw, gaping unease that had burrowed into his gut. Just silence. A hollow, endless void of nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. Life moved forward, mile after mile, trip after trip. But the memory of her never left him. It stayed lodged in the back of his mind like a shard of glass, sharp and impossible to ignore. Every time he got behind the wheel, he found himself glancing at the cars around him, scanning their passengers, searching for her, for that tight, painful bond, for those wild, pleading eyes, for any sign that she was still out there. But he never saw her again. And then, one evening, while waiting for his next haul at a roadside cafe just outside of Birmingham, he saw the news. The headline on the TV above the counter wasn't bold or sensational, just a small segment playing between other stories, quick, routine, the kind of crime that happened all too often but rarely made waves beyond the local area. But the moment the words scrolled across the screen, his entire body went rigid. Body of missing woman found in shallow grave near motorway. His stomach dropped. His fingers tightened around the cup of coffee he hadn't even touched. The voice of the newsreader barely registered in his ears as he stared at the screen, unblinking. Police suspect victim was part of a larger human trafficking operation spanning multiple cities. Evidence suggests she had been transported in several different vehicles in the days leading up to her death. Authorities believe she had attempted to escape multiple times, but was forcibly moved from car to car to avoid detection. His breath stalled. His mind reeled. Multiple reports had been made about a woman matching her description appearing distressed in different vehicles along the motorway. Calls were received from drivers who claimed to have seen her in the passenger seat of multiple cars, visibly terrified, but police had not been able to track her down in time. He felt sick. The woman. His woman. The same face. The same hair. The same silent scream, trapped behind glass. She had been real. And she had been begging for help. And he, just like everyone else, hadn't been able to save her. The footage on the screen cut to a photo. A grainy, low-quality image of her, likely taken from a missing persons report. Even in that frozen image, she looked different, her expression softer, her eyes not yet haunted by the terror he had seen that night. But it was her. He barely heard the rest of the report. The words droned on, a blur of official statements, cold facts, and legal terminology that meant nothing in the face of what had happened. His ears buzzed with white noise, his pulse thudding relentlessly as the broadcast continued details about the arrests, the dismantling of a long-hidden trafficking network, the men who had been taken into custody, the routes they had used, the victims who had disappeared without a trace. They spoke of evidence, burner phones recovered, falsified documents, the exchange of cash between faceless criminals who had treated human lives like disposable cargo. They spoke of patterns, girls taken, moved from city to city, passed between vehicles like parcels, each switch erasing a trail that authorities had failed to follow in time. They spoke of bodies, some found, some still missing, buried in unmarked places, their final moments lost in the endless churn of the motorway, drowned out by the indifference of moving traffic. But none of it mattered. Not now. Not to him. Because in the end, all the arrests, all the investigations, all the reports dissecting how and why they couldn't undo the fact that for her, it had all been too late. She was gone. Discarded like she had never mattered, like her life had never been anything more than a transaction between monsters who never planned on letting her leave alive. And the last time she had been seen alive, she had been looking straight at him, her terror so raw, so desperate, so undeniable, pleading for a salvation that never came. The image seared itself into his mind, a permanent brand, a weight that he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. Because now he understood. She hadn't just been looking at him. She had chosen him. The last sliver of hope she had left in this world had been placed in his hands. And he hadn't saved her.